I, as a girl, always loved the Stooges. I think it's a matter of taste whether you're a girl or a boy. There's a lot of women I know that love to see the Stooges, and then there are some that say they don't like the slapstick. I personally think they are very funny, the Stooges. They make you laugh. They make you forget if you have any troubles at all, and you watch one of their films. They are so funny. Their timing is so great. They have they're such characters that when you do watch them, and if you're not prejudiced about the slapstick, I think they're the funniest things around. I think they are terrific, just terrific.
I always loved the Three Stooges. Even in my elementary school days, kids would come up to me and say, "You're Jill Howard. Which one of the Three Stooges did you was your relatives?" And I say, "Well, pretty much all of them." And I would say Shemp was my grandfather, Mo was my uncle, and Curly was my uncle. And I always loved their antics. I loved their timing. I laughed like crazy. I couldn't wait to come home from school and watch them myself. Was never affected by it. They were just my family on the television set. It was just really just enjoyed having that spontaneity and laughter growing up being a kid.
I was a little girl at the time, and to me Shemp was very, very funny and very kind and very caring.
Well, Shemp got his name when his parents were coming over from Russia, and his mother couldn't say Sam. So she said, Shemp, Shemp. And that's how he got the name, Shemp. It was supposed to be Sam, but she just could not pronounce it that way. So they picked it up, Shemp. I think he was probably very mischievous. He was far from quiet. He always had something. He was born slapstick, funny, comedian. He just had it in him. There was an older brother that was an insurance man. He wasn't in the Stooges. He was in insurance, and he felt he was more like a businessman. He didn't have the talent that the other brothers had. Then there was Shemp, Mo, and Curly was the baby. They were a very close family. The children loved the mother and father. They were a very family-oriented unit. There was a lot of love in their house. The boys grew up knowing that it was a very close-knit family. Well, I never met Ted Healy, but I remember in conversation with and hearing my mother-in-law speak that Ted and Shemp were very good friends. And Ted Healy had asked Shemp to come and see one of his performances, and Shemp brought Mo along with him. And they had been friends. They had known Ted for a long time. And Ted had said, "I want you two boys to come with me to Philadelphia and go see a very funny comedian that plays the violin." And they went, and that's how the three had originated. But it was a very close friend of Shemp's, Ted Healy, and that's how the two of them had really originated the Stooges. And then Mo and Shemp were with Ted Healy, and that's when they went and discovered Larry. The original lineup, when they were with Ted Healy, was Shemp, Mo, and Larry. The reason Curly replaced Shemp was because Shemp wanted to go out and do independent films. He worked with John Wayne, and he also worked with Abbott and Costello and several different comedians that he felt he wanted to expand a little. And so he decided he wanted to bring in his brother, Curly, to replace him. And Curly was willing. Curly wanted to get into the act. And Shemp was the one that said, we've got to cut Curly's hair. And we'll call him Curly and he'll be hairless. So Shemp was the one that had that idea. So that when you see Curly, he's got the bald head. My father-in-law, Shemp, was very, very close with Billy Gilbert. And Billy Gilbert used to come over every week, and they would sit and they would talk and they would just have a marvelous time. They were very good friends. But there were several. I can't tell you that there were any specific because Shemp had so many friends. He was friendly with everybody. The other Stooges did not want to go independently. They wanted to remain together. And Shemp felt he wanted to do other films. He was in numerous films, and he was very funny. He would have continued on with that, but when Curly had his stroke in 1945, he could no longer work in the act. So Shemp's brother Mo said, Shemp, we need you to come back. You've got to come back into the act. And because Shemp loved his brothers so much, he said, okay, I'll come back. So that's why he replaced Curly. He came back into the act, and he was in the act from 1945 to 1955. And he would have been in there longer, but he had a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away. Well, Curly, I hadn't met until after he had the stroke, so I don't know what he was like before. But after the stroke, he was in the wheelchair, and he couldn't speak. His speech wasn't there. And he was like a shadow, I'm sure, of what he was before. When a person suffers a stroke, it's very demeaning. It takes away all your dignity, and that's the condition that he was in when I met him.
Gentlemen. That ain't for us. We're not gentlemen. Speak for yourself.
Mo off campus, off the screen, was more serious. He was the businessman. He took care of the books. Larry was there, very easygoing. Whatever the fellas decided, Mo and Shemp was fine with him. He was very agreeable. Mo was really like the leader off screen. He was the one that made a lot of the decisions and handled business. Mo wasn't as relaxed. He was more like on his guard a little bit. Whereas Shemp, he was such a good guy. He was so good. Just too bad he had to pass away in 55. And they never were able to replace anybody as good as him. Shemp was voted the homeliest man in Hollywood. And he wasn't really that homely, but from being hit in the face so many times, he did have pockmarks. But they just gave him that title, and I think it must have been because of all the hit in the faces. I don't think Shemp was really ever frightened on stage. He was more frightened off stage with different pictures that they were in, with animals, with tigers. Once he got in front of the camera, he was a natural. He had the reputation of people in show business that he was an original. his timing, his acting, everything just came from within. It was all very spontaneous. Shemp had a lot of phobias. He wouldn't drive a car. He wouldn't go on he went on a train, but he wouldn't fly. And they had a lot of personal appearances overseas, but they had to cancel them out because he wouldn't fly. And that's the only way you can get overseas. So they cut that out right away. If they could take a train, he would do it. When they went to New York, he took the train. He took the train all over. He did have a lot of phobias. He did drive a car for a short time. My husband, Mort, was in the car with Shemp, and Shemp is driving, and they're going along, and all of a sudden, Shemp goes into the barbershop window, drives right into a barbershop window, and all the cups fell down on the car. And it must have been driving an open with the convertible, because all the cups came down on them. And my husband, Mort, got out of the car, and he said, "This is the last time I'm ever driving with you again." And that was the last time that Shemp ever drove a car. He never drove after that.
I do understand he had some phobias, and he didn't drive, and he didn't want to fly, and Babe was the same way. Babe didn't want to go in an elevator. She wouldn't fly. But to me, he just was a very dynamic man.
When I met Mort in 1949, I was told that his father was in show business, but I never knew who the father was. All I knew, he was in show business. So Mort and I had a few dates, and then was the third date. Mort said, "I'm going to take you to the Clyde Beatty Circus, and I'm bringing my mother and father along. They want to meet you." So I said, "Fine, wonderful." So he came to pick me up, and I went out to the car, and he introduced me to his mother and father that were sitting in the back seat. And when I turned around and I saw his father, I knew right away who it was. And they were so wonderful to me, meeting me. They were so nice. And we got to the Clyde Beatty Circus, and who's standing out in front to greet us was Clyde Beatty. And I thought, gee, this is really nice. And he knew Shemp very well, because they put their arms around each other and hugged each other. And they introduced me to Clyde Beatty. And Clyde Beatty says, "Come with me. I'm going to take you to your seat." Well, they took us to a box seat, and they sent over a bucket of champagne. And all these fans were coming over to our box and asking Shemp to sign their autographs. And I was in awe of all of this, because I wasn't used to this. And I said to him afterwards, I said, "Doesn't it bother you when all these fans are coming over and asking you to sign autographs? Doesn't it bother you a little bit?" He said, "The minute they stop asking me for autographs is the minute I'm going to have to stop and worry what's happening to me." I thought that was a great answer.
My sister, Jerry, dated Mort Howard. I was the little sister. I used to go on dates with them. And it was very exciting when they announced their engagement. And we found out that, she was going to be marrying the son of this very famous movie star named Shemp Howard. We were very average. We were a very average family living in Los Angeles on New Hampshire. We lived in a fourplex. And when Mort brought Babe and Shemp over to meet my mother and dad, the neighbors found out that one of the Three Stooges was coming to our house, and this was a fourplex, and there were 4 families, and there was a rug that had been in the lobby of this little complex, and my mother was very concerned that the rug was a little shabby, so my parents went out and bought a new rug, took the old rug that belonged to the apartment building, shoved it behind the staircase, put the new rug out. So we looked like, we lived in a very nice place. But we were a very great family, very loving family, and it was very exciting to become involved with show business people. I used to wait up for her because we shared a bedroom, and I never went to sleep until she got home. And I would listen to her tell my mother about all of the dates that she had. And so this particular night, when she had found out that Mort was the son of Shemp Howard, everybody was very excited, and I was listening by the door, and I really wasn't sure who one of the Three Stooges was. I was only 8 years old at the time, and we didn't really go to movies very much, but I sensed that it was something very important. Just a lot of movies that Shemp was in, he was so funny. But he was funny off screen, because the first time we went to their house, they had a big party, and I was the only child, actually, because I'm 11 years younger than my sister, and so there weren't a lot of children my age at this party. And Babe was a marvelous cook, and she put all this food out, and there must have been 50 or 60 people there to meet us. And Shemp took my hand. We filled our plate. He says, "Come on, kid, I'll take care of you." And we filled our plates, and he took me to a separate table, and it was just the 2 of us. And there was corn on the cob. And he said, "This is how you butter corn on the cob." And he took a piece of bread, and he put the butter on it, and he said, "See, this is how you do corn on the cob." And I never forgot that. And then he would tell me stories and jokes. He was very, very funny and very much into children, and always made a special point of making me feel very special, because there were always a lot of parties that we went to, and it was a very different lifestyle than what we were used to. And these are people from New York and comedians, and it was always very funny because everyone was telling jokes, and I was just sitting there taking it all in and enjoying every second of it. Now I'm like 9 years old now, and but he was so caring about me being a child there and wanting me to feel part of it, that it's just, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Shemp was a wonderful, wonderful man.
He did love television. Shemp felt television was the thing of the future, and he was thrilled about that. It was a change. It was progress. They were stepping up.
This is a television camera. Take one.
Joe Palooka, he enjoyed. Working with Abbott and Costello, he enjoyed. In fact, I went to one of the rehearsals with when he did Africa Screams, and that was a riot. That was so funny. I enjoyed seeing that. But he did so many different movies, and every one of them he enjoyed.
Quiet. All right, go ahead, camera. Keep going, Stanley. I'm bringing you back to camp all alone, single-handed.
Having Shemp take me down to the set of Africa Screams was so exciting, because I had never seen him film any of his movies.
There. What's the matter? You've been eating olives, eh? Those wild olives, eh?
Come here.
Keep going.
And so I was sitting and watching them film, and at one point he was knocked over the head with a bottle, one of these plastic bottles, and it cut him right above the eye, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But they came right back and they fixed him up, and he was fine. He was okay. But it was very exciting. And then he took me to the, for lunch in the commissary, and we met a lot of different people, and it was very exciting for me because I had never been around showbiz before. And that was a big experience. It was fun. He was just a wonderful human being all around. He was funny, he was kind, he was generous, he was a loving husband, he was a loving father. I can't say enough about how wonderful he was to me.
My father didn't really talk a lot about his growing up. It was more his teenage years when he first started driving. My grandfather was worried about him driving due to the fact that my grandfather did not drive. My grandfather helped him start his own business. He was always supportive. My father was very, very intelligent. He graduated high school at 16 years old. And my grandfather, Shemp, was always very proud of him because of that. Again, very close family, very loving, likes playing a lot of sports together. I don't believe they did that. They did enjoy going to the fights. They would go to the fights, and they would, do normal father-son things. They would have projects that they would be involved in. As far as the show business end, he really never wanted my father to get into show business. He wanted him to do something on his own and not be involved in that type of, around those type of people, because my father, Mort, had grown up around it so much that he didn't have any desire to be in that business. And my grandparents were out of town a lot. They were on the road. My father was left at home they did have, I won't say servants, but they had a housekeeper that would take care of him and watch him. And he always said he was always happy when they came home. He missed them while they were gone and happy when they returned.
Mort was an only child, and he was very close to his mother and father. Mort was a wonderful, wonderful person, and husband and father. He grew up in a showbiz family, and he always had a lot of people over at the house, a lot of show people, show business. He never boasted about being the son of Shemp Howard. In fact, he was a little embarrassed. He didn't want people to know. And he was very bright. He graduated from high school when he was 15 years old. And he went on to UCLA until he was old enough to enlist in the Coast Guard. And Shemp and Babe were so upset that he was going to enlist because they thought, here, their baby is going off to war. And he enlisted. And they were very, very nervous when he did go away and served in the Coast Guard. And I remember my mother-in-law saying that when her and Shemp saw Mort get off the train when the war was over and he came out, she says his hair, he had no hair because they shaved, they couldn't have the hair. And she says he looked like a little dead rat without his hair because he had gorgeous, gorgeous wavy hair, beautiful blue eyes. He resembled the looks of Babe. And there was a little bit of Shemp. There was a little resemblance of Shemp. But Shemp adored Mort. And the two of them, Babe and Shemp, it was their only child. And he was exceptional. Mort was an exceptional person. My mother-in-law, Babe, was very outspoken. She said what was on her mind. She would always say, "I tell it like it is." And Shemp was the pussycat. He wasn't as outspoken as my mother-in-law, but everybody loved my mother-in-law, even though they knew she was that way. She was marvelous, and we knew Shemp was the pussycat, and that's what made them such a cute couple. They were a marvelous couple. My in-laws, Babe and Shemp, had a wonderful relationship together. They loved each other very much, and Shemp was very much in love with Babe because he was always hugging her and kissing her and putting his arms around her. And Babe was also a very loving wife.
Babe Howard was one of the toughest broads anyone could ever meet. She was unique, she was one of a kind, and you either loved her or you didn't like her. Babe could be very direct, and if your hair didn't look good that day or the dress you were wearing, she was not a phony. And she would tell you, she would say, "I tell it like it is. I tell it like it is. You know, don't wear that again."
Babe Howard was a wonderful mother-in-law. She loved her family, she loved me, she loved Mort. When Jill was born, they were excited. She was very, very warm, wonderful person. And she was also very outspoken. She said what was on her mind. She loved to cook. She loved to have people over to her house. She was always entertaining. It was like open house all the time. She had a lot of friends, and they all loved her. She was fun to be with. At parties, she would sit and play the piano and sing, and she really reminded me a lot of Sophie Tucker. She was just very spontaneous, fun, wonderful, and I was very happy that she was my mother-in-law. I loved her.
Babe Howard, again, was a phenomenal cook, a party giver. She had a sense of humor that just was off the charts. She had a great sense of humor. Good timing like my grandfather, actually. She was a tough woman at times. You know, she looked at you, and if you did something wrong, you knew you were dead. She loved my father dearly. She loved my mother dearly. She loved my sister dearly. We did dinners pretty much every weekend at her home. She was just always there for us, you know, very just a loving woman. She also kept many, many scrapbooks on my grandfather. A lot of the memorabilia which I have today was due to her diligent being a historian for my grandfather. She was just a good woman, very good woman, very gracious.
That's a funny story with my mother-in-law, Babe, as the air raid warden. She wanted to know exactly what was going on all the time. And when there was the blackouts, she didn't want to have to be sitting in the house with blackout shades drawn. She wanted to be right out there and know what was going on. She was a tough cookie. She really was. She had to be right in there to know firsthand what's happening. So that's why she decided to be the air raid warden. And Shemp would stay in the house, and she went out with her little flashlight to make sure that everybody's windows were down, and she wanted it all to know firsthand what it was. That's why she was the air raid warden. At my wedding, we were married, Mort and I were married at Ciro's on the Strip. And Judge Brand was the one that married us. Mo was there, Mo and Helen, Larry and his wife. They were all there, all the families. And it was a wonderful wedding, and everybody was happy, and Babe and Shemp were all excited, and my family, they were all excited, and my grandmother and grandfather came out, and everybody had a marvelous time at the wedding. It was wonderful.
When my sister married Lord Howard, it was the saddest day of my life. Well, the wedding itself was very exciting because she was going to be married at Ciro's, and we went and we bought our dresses, and we had the guest list, and we were very excited about planning the wedding and making sure everything was going to go just so. And my grandparents flew out, and it was quite an event. And I remember putting on my little flower. I was a junior bridesmaid because I believe I was 9 years old at the time. And I walked down the aisle, and I took my place. And I saw my sister come down the aisle with my father. And there was Mort, and he had always been very good to me because Mort wanted to win my affection. He would bring me boxes of bubble gum and boxes of Hershey bars. Well, my sister had several boyfriends. She was going with another young man named Dick Lewis. And she always took me on her dates with her because my mom said that she had to, but I think she really wanted to. So the dates would try to outdo each other with bringing me presents. So I did love Mort, and when, of course, there was no contest, because, you know, Mort did come from a show business family. His father was Shemp Howard of the Three Stooges. The other guy was very nice, but, you know, Mort was kind of the cat's meow. He was very handsome, and I loved him. And I was very excited that my sister was getting married. And when I say it was the worst day of my life, when they were pronounced man and wife, and they turned around and walked down the aisle, and the music kept playing, all of a sudden it dawned on me, and I could cry today, that my sister wasn't going to be there that night to cuddle up with and to tell me stories. And I started to cry. I was hysterical. I was absolutely hysterical, and everybody had to come and calm me down. And then I said, Mort's taking my sister away from me. And Shemp came over, and he told me a little joke. So I guess I got over it. But I still miss her. I was over at their house quite a bit after they got home from their honeymoon. Seeing Shemp on the screen and being at his house and having dinner with him and hearing his jokes. At first, it's quite an awesome experience. And then it's kind of exciting, and you feel a part of this, very wonderful person, and just knowing that you know him and that you're part of his life, it's pretty exciting. But then he's family, and he was very much family. We were very, very close with Babe and Shemp, my mom and dad, and we had a lot of parties and celebrations together.
Was pregnant, and Shemp and Babe were excited, so excited, and my mother and father very excited. Everybody couldn't wait until I was going to have the baby. My husband and I were supposed to go out to a movie. Jill, my daughter, that hadn't been born yet, she was 2 weeks early, so we hadn't expected her to come so soon. And we were supposed to go out to the movies with my in-laws, and we called them and we said, we can't go because I'm starting to get some pains. Baby is coming. Well, Shemp got so excited. He was sucking on a lollipop, and when he heard that I'm getting ready to go into the hospital, he bit down on the lollipop and broke his tooth. So that was one episode. And Mort and I drove in our car, and my in-laws drove with my mother and father. Well, my mother and father had to drive because Babe and Shemp didn't drive. And they were so nervous. They were so nervous. They couldn't wait to get to the hospital. When we get there, all of it was like a parade. We're all marching into the hospital together. And when Jill was finally born, Shemp was so excited. He was so happy. And they were just thrilled with her. And the times that we had together with them were marvelous. They just adored their little baby Jill.
Babe and Shemp owned a fourplex, and my mother and myself and I lived next door. And whenever I would cry during the middle of the night or during the day or any time the tears would come, Shemp was always knocking on the door, making sure that I was okay and that there was, I wasn't being left alone, or that I was in good hands, and that he couldn't stand to see me cry. Even when we'd go out, if I ever had a tear, he would just say, you've got to stop. You can't cry. I can't take it. You've got to just stop crying. He never, didn't want to handle the tears. Couldn't handle the tears. He passed away when I was 3, and I do recall many memories of my grandfather Shemp at 3. After that, as I was getting a little bit older, I was worried that he would get hurt, or really would get a poke in the eye, or get slapped across the face, and it would bother me. But I would ask my parents, did they really hit him? And they would say, he's okay, didn't get hurt, don't worry. But there were times where he did get hurt, though, supposedly, from what the stories that I did hear.
As a child, you think they're really poking your eyes out. But then Shemp taught me how to do the trick, and that was pretty exciting, and I used to poke my friends in the eyes a lot. But the one who really does a funny interpretation of Shemp is my niece Sandy, and she will do all of the impressions of the Three Stooges. She really did inherit his wit.
Making the connection with my grandfather wasn't that difficult. It was the sound effects that I wanted to figure out. How did they get those sound effects in there? Why couldn't he do that when he came home or came over to visit? That's what was more intriguing to me, was that. My grandparents, neither one of them drove. We used to take cabs and go out to the racetrack. Both Shemp, who I called Papa Shemp, and my grandma Babe enjoyed the horses, and we always had probably the best seat in the house in the turf club, and everybody always came over to us and made a fuss over us and brought flowers, and my grandparents would have the finest champagnes or wines, and then when the race was over with, in those days they used different color tickets for dollar value. They had blue, red, pink, green. And being the age that I went around collecting these tickets, thinking that they were real money. And that was pretty much a highlight. And then we would go to the kiddie parks, and again, we would always pull up in a cab. And my grandfather would get out of the cab, and everybody would run over and say, "Oh my gosh, there's Shemp Howard," and want his autograph. And they would lead us to the front of the lines at the kiddie parks. And a lot of the parents probably weren't real thrilled that we were getting special treatment. And going to restaurants, we had special treatment. That was a lot of fun. My grandfather also, Shemp, liked to work in the backyard. He had fruit trees. They planted a little garden. He was the first one that ever had me grow my own carrots. I had never grown anything before. So he showed me how to grow a row of carrots, or grow a little row of radishes, and pull them out when they were ready. And it's just the love, My grandmother was an incredible cook. Even at 3 years old, I ate everything she ever cooked. And the love my grandfather just gave me, and every time we spent time together, there was so much love and affection, and lots of hugging and kissing, and just a lot of love. Shemp and Mort used to go fishing. They fished a lot. Well, I wanted to go too, and I was young. And of course, they didn't want to take me on a deep sea fishing boat, to bring up all these terrible looking fish and sharks and have me fall overboard. So they took me to the Sportsman's Lodge, which had 3 ponds, the little fish, the medium fish, and the big fish. And you paid by how much the fish weighed. Well, of course, I had to have the big fish. I didn't want the little fish. And I think at that time, this was in the early 50s, I think it cost him close to $15 that day for a trout. And that was my last fishing trip with him. They never took me back there after that. But I caught a pretty good sized fish, and I was very proud of it.
When Shemp passed away, I will never forget that evening. We lived right next door to my mother-in-law. And we knew Shemp was going to the fights, which he did almost every Friday night, the Hollywood Legion. And he was one of these people, he would sit in the front, and every hit that the boxers would give, every punch he would take, and he would go back. And he was so funny that when they rang the bell, the boy came with the towel to wipe Shemp off because he went through every action. So Shemp was like the second attraction. It was funny to see him. There were a lot of times that Mort and I and Shemp and Babe would go to the fights, and we would laugh just looking at Shemp, seeing the way he would react. Well, that night we didn't go to the fights. He went with 2 of his friends, and we were with my mother-in-law, and it was around 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night. His 2 friends came back, and they said, Shemp passed away. And we said, what happened? What happened? And they explained to us that they were driving over Farm Boulevard, and they were laughing and joking, and Shemp was sitting in the middle, and he lit up a cigar. And right after he lit up the cigar, he hunched over. And they thought he's joking around. They said, Shemp, stop acting crazy, Shemp. And they started to shake him, and they realized something was wrong. And when they saw that Shemp was in trouble, they headed straight to St. Joseph's Hospital. And when they got him to St. Joseph's Hospital, he was already pronounced dead, and they said he had a cerebral hemorrhage, and it hit him right away, and that's what caused his death. And it was very traumatic for us because it was so sudden. It was very, very sudden. And we were all shocked and could not believe it, and it was terrible. It was pretty bad for my mother-in-law also.
Well, I did not go to the funeral, but I remember that day very well. We were all very shocked and saddened. It was such a shock because one day Shemp is alive, and the next day he's not. And then to lose this man was unbelievable. But I remember going to Babe and Shemp's apartment the day of the funeral. They didn't take me to the funeral, and I think I babysat Jill. I think Babe might have been there. I can't remember exactly who was there. But I do remember sitting in the bedroom when everybody came back to the house after the funeral, and Milton Burl brought me a plate of food. And I thought that was pretty exciting. Uncle Milty brought me a plate of food. But Babe was very much a part of our lives after that. Babe was part of our family. Babe did become our family member. And there wasn't a party or an occasion that Babe Howard was not included.
For a short time after we did see Mo and Helen and Larry, and they would visit over at my mother-in-law's house, and they all stayed pretty close.
We were not real close with Mo and Helen, but yet we would get together on holidays. We would get together for family parties. The funny part was when I was probably around 10 years old, I took a ceramic class, and lo and behold, when I walked in there to get to sit down and find my chair, Mo was sitting across the table from me because he also was involved in ceramics, and I had no idea he was taking the exact same class. So we kind of had a little more bonding that way because we were both involved in the same medium. And we both did it for about 6 months. And of course, he sold his for a lot more money than I sold mine for. His today are probably still worth a lot more money than mine. But unfortunately, that when my father passed away, we actually got closer to Mo and Helen at that time. There had been some issues throughout the years that got resolved, but we seemed to see more of them as after in the later 70s than earlier on, during that time. But we still keep in touch with Joan, who's Mo's daughter, and my cousins, and we still have our family get-togethers. And as far as Larry, I also went to see Larry when he was in the motion picture home, and I told him, who I was, because he hadn't seen me in probably 25 years, and the tears came down from his eyes, and at that time he was not in very good health, but it was, at least I was able to say my goodbyes to him that way.
My other daughter, Sandy, was named after Shemp, because right after Shemp passed away, I wanted to have another baby and name the baby with an S, and so that's why we named Sandy after her grandfather, Shemp.
After all these years, I am still amazed at the popularity, and especially because it seems like they just are becoming more and more popular. We have a website. We get so many hits a day with this website. It amazes me. And more women now are actually liking the Stooges than ever before. I have more fan mail now from women than I do men. And years ago, I would get more hate mail from the women, and they were the man's man, and I'm seeing the dynamics change, and it's maybe, just everybody's growing up, and we're into the more nostalgia age, and they're not looking at it as violent as they had thought years and years ago. But I'm so thrilled that their popularity is and their memories are still alive.
Shemp was the original. He was funny. He was so funny off stage as he was on stage, because everything that he did, he would do a little dance or a little shove or whatever he did, it was like the funniest thing you ever saw. You couldn't help but laugh at him. He did things that you wouldn't expect someone to do. He was a born comedian. He was just born to be Shemp, a comedian.